Hello, this is Greg Holcomb with VRMA, and I'm here with Matt Kiessling, the Vice President of Short-Term Rental Policy at the Travel Technology Association. And we're going to discuss engaging stakeholders. So now that you've formed a group or an alliance locally or even regionally, how do you expand it and get more people involved outside of your initial managers and hosts?
Sure. So I think it's actually one of the most important steps in putting together a local group. I think it's one that often goes a little bit overlooked. If you've got short-term rental managers or hosts that are showing up to city council meetings and they're advocating to make sure that city councils enact fair and reasonable regulations there, or to fight against bans or prohibitions on short-term rentals, it's pretty obvious what camp they're going to be in, right? They have a short-term rental or they manage short-term rentals, and so clearly they're deriving direct economic benefit, and they're going to want to make sure that they preserve that industry is preserved. What I think often goes overlooked is the idea that you should really think about your ecosystem as a property manager or as a short-term rental owner. Oftentimes you've got folks who, after guests leave, come and clean the house, or you have a linen service that you drop all the sheets and towels with at the end of a vacation rental week. You've got a local restaurant that you send folks to. You've got local coffee shops, liquor store, grocery store, all these different things that folks partake in when they stay in your short-term rental, or services that are utilized by you as a short-term rental owner or manager, whether it's landscaping contractors, whatever. Those folks derive a very direct benefit from being engaged with the short-term rental industry, but oftentimes their story goes sort of untold in these fights. And so if you can engage those folks and start talking to them about why their voice matters in these local battles, and get them to weigh in with city council members, whether it's at a meeting is always better, but even if it's somebody who has a relationship with a city council member that maybe lives down the street with them, and they can say, look, one of my landscapers or two of my landscapers are a direct result of the fact that I have these 10 vacation homes that we take care of the yards for. That's a powerful message from a local economy standpoint of these are two taxpayers who have jobs and live in the community and are taking care of these properties. And if you do something that is adverse to the short-term rental industry and my short-term rentals go away, not only does that take tax money out of your pocket or take the economic benefit of the tourists coming into town, but it also takes away these two jobs, because I can't keep a couple extra people on at the end of the rental season, because going forward there's no clarity on what is going to happen to short-term rentals in our community. And so having those people able to weigh in with city council members makes a big difference. I mean, the other thing is, what are all the different locations, like I said, coffee shops, restaurants, what are the places that people frequent? And can you get the owners or the folks that work at those places to turn out to city council meetings or sit down with their local city council members and have a conversation about what short-term rental guests mean? I mean, one of the things that's interesting to do at a local level is do sort of an overlay of what does the hotel industry look like in a given neighborhood or city, and what does the short-term rental footprint look like in a given neighborhood or city. And often what you'll see is hotels are sort of clustered in this downtown type area or the tourist area, where short-term rentals are sort of spread throughout. And what you wind up with is increased foot traffic, or foot traffic from tourists that you wouldn't otherwise have in local hotspots. And those folks are benefiting from that. The town's benefiting from that. That business is doing better because there's more foot traffic that they wouldn't otherwise have. And folks are able to discover things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to discover if they're confined to sort of that local downtown area. And so having those folks involved in telling the story is always a key component, I think, of making the case for fair and reasonable short-term rental regulation, and why you need to put together a framework that embraces it rather than provides a negative environment for it.
So once you've expanded out your organization, you have more stakeholders involved, what type of information should be prepared and available to go on to the next step of actually meeting with policymakers?
Yeah, so I think some of it is kind of what I just touched on, which is the idea of, one, you should know what does the footprint look like in your town? About how many short-term rentals are there, or are you as a group responsible for, at least the folks who are the stakeholders sitting around the table? I've got 10 that I manage, or I've got 15 that I manage, whatever the case may be, so that you can come in and kind of talk about from an accurate perspective what the numbers look like. Because one of the things that we see often is there's a lot of lazy math in figuring out how many short-term rentals there are in a community, right? We go to the 4 or 5 big websites and we say this one's got 200 short-term rentals and this one's at 3, and then we take all the numbers and we add them together. But in reality, if you've got 40 or 50% overlap in listings in your community, that number may be a fraction of what the city council is estimating that it would be. The other things you want to pull together are things like, what does the tax revenue look like locally, whether it's the property taxes that folks are paying on those short-term rentals that they're able to continue to own because they have short-term rental income coming in associated with them. What does the occupancy tax, if it's applicable, or sales tax, if it's applicable, look like? Making sure that you've got all of that information on hand, or at least a relatively good idea of what those numbers look like, and then calculating things like what does an average night's stay bring into the community. We've got a little calculator on the STRAC website where you can plug in, and every CVB has data that basically says this is what an average night stay costs in this community, and it gives you the ability to say, okay, I've rented my short-term rental for 50 nights over the course of the year, and you can plug that in and arrive at an end number of, this is how many nights, this is how many guests, this is how much I'm dumping into the local economy every single year based on that per spent visitor number. And so having some of that information available as well, I think is important. And then, we talked about those ancillary alliance folks, those folks that are secondary to the actual short-term rental itself. Their ability to stand up and say, this is one extra employee, or this is 12% of my business, or 20% of my business, or 30% of my business is derived from the work that I'm doing with these short-term rental folks. All of that stuff is important information. All of that stuff is sort of key to making sure that you're creating an accurate picture of what's going on from a short-term rental perspective, rather than letting the folks who are opposing you, or who are pushing for a ban on short-term rentals, define the story and define the narrative of what's actually going on in the short-term rental world. You want to make sure that you've got accurate information before you sit down or before you show up to a city council meeting.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been Matt Kiessling with the Travel Technology Association, discussing engaging stakeholders.